1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Раз, два, три, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Раз, два, три, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Раз, два, три. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Что здесь, мороженое? Мороженое? 1, 2, 3.
Раз, два, раз, два, раз, два, раз, два, раз, два. Раз, два, три, раз, два, три.
Was sie nun leider gar nie erfahren würde, war die Tatsache, dass diesen Ring einst Marilyn Monroe getragen hatte. Das war mir wichtig. Nicht nur der hohe materielle, sondern vor allem ideelle Wert. Zumindest, wenn man zu denen zählt, welche die Monroe als eine der ganz großen Schauspielerinnen empfanden. Und das taten meine Frau und ich in gleichem Maße. Dass Marita in diesem einen Punkt jedoch unwissend bleiben würde, änderte nichts an der Bedeutung und Symbolik. Auch das habe ich auf der Erde gelernt, die Magie des Sinnlosen zu erkennen. Wie wichtig gerade die Dinge sind, die jemand nicht weiß. Marita steckte sich den Ring an den Finger und betrachtete ihn wie das Kind, das uns nicht vergönnt gewesen war. Ich spürte das Strahlen, das tief in ihr vonstatten ging. Sie legte ihr Kinn, eine Verlegenheit freundlich spielend, auf der eigenen Schulter ab und sagte, ich würde dir gerne um den Hals fallen, aber nicht vor all den Leuten. Doch ich sage dir eins, mein Herz gehört dir. Und gleich darauf, belustigt, du siehst, wie bestechlich ich bin. Für einen Diamantring bin ich bereit, mein Herz zu verschenken. Ich lachte und sagte, erinnerst du dich an den Film mit der Monroe und Jane Russell? Sie hob ihr Kinn für ihre Stimme leicht an und sang, Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Wir sollten ihn uns mal wieder anschauen, schlug ich vor. Genau das sollten wir, antwortete sie. Bitterkeit. Ich empfand tiefe, schwarze, stechende Bitterkeit. Verzweiflung. Und mit einem Mal ein Gefühl des Aufbegehrens. Ein Gedanke flammte. Ich fragte mich, inwieweit es möglich wäre, das Schicksal zu provozieren. Eine Roulettekugel zu werfen und sodann die kaum durchschaubaren Gesetze walten zu lassen, denen diese Kugel im rotierenden Kessel der Glücks- und Unglücksmaschine ausgeliefert war. Ich sah mich um. Auf einem der benachbarten Tische saß eine Gruppe von arabisch aussehenden Männern und Frauen. Sie trugen alle Skipullover, wie die meisten hier, zu einem skandinavischen Muster, irgendwelchen stilisierten Rentieren und Schneekristallen. Ich fand es ziemlich niederträchtig, wenn Menschen, die es in keiner Weise nötig hatten, den Globus bereisten. Aus Langeweile und Anmaßung und Naturverachtung. Diese Typen hier, die aus irgendeiner verdammten Wüste Öl herauspumpten, oder was auch immer für gut gehende Geschäfte sie betrieben, was hatten die auf einem amerikanischen Berg zu suchen? Warum trugen sie Norweger-Pullover und tranken kalifornischen Wein? Warum sahen sie so unverschämt zu unserem Tisch herüber und gafften meiner Frau ins Dekolleté? Mit dunkler werdender Miene schaute ich zu dem Tisch hinüber und fixierte diesen einen Mann. Sodann brach ich einen Streit vom Zaun, sodass Marita meinen musste, ich habe, ob des Diamantenkaufs, den Verstand verloren. Die 4 Männer vom Nebentisch zuerst unseren Tisch umzingelten und, als ich mit meinen gotteslästerlichen Beschimpfungen nicht aufhörte, ich kurzerhand in eine Schlägerei verwickelt wurde. In der weiteren Folge stellten sich ein der Hotelmanager, das Sicherheitspersonal und mehrere uniformierte Männer. Ich selbst fand mich kurze Zeit später in einer Zelle wieder. Es lief alles genau nach Plan. Das Raumschiff musste nun ohne mich starten. Und es dauerte bis zum nächsten Morgen, dass ich als ein unbescholtener Bürger identifiziert wurde und zur Erleichterung des Hotelmanagements die ganze Angelegenheit.
Я прошу прощения, мы рассчитывали на формат.
So, I beg your pardon, we were counting for a classic round table, but way too many people got a credit and we had to retreat to this bigger room because that room is a little smaller than we need. So, if there's any inconvenience, I would like to beg your excuse. About the topic, it's unfortunately very sharp, and the group of information at the start of the Russian intervention, we were in the center of, in the eye of the storm, so to say, and what we've seen, what we've analyzed, and what we tried to tackle. So it's like an informational opposition. Let me cover shortly what I'm going to tell you. At the end of this round table, you will be able to download the text on the website, full version. So back when the Center of Military Political Studies, we were working on a project Fleet 2017 about Crimea, and we looked into the problems of Black Sea Fleet of Russian Federation in Crimea. We noted, it was back in 2008, we saw the vulnerability of Ukrainian information space just before the Russian propaganda machine just getting started. And we noted that Ukraine doesn't do anything to tackle that problem. There was just small non-government, non-controlled by government resources that were pushing the pro-Ukrainian line, but due to lack of coordination, the effect was much lower. So the government and the state kind of washed its hands clean from that problem. It's pertaining to the Crimea and the south of Ukraine. And Russia was, for a long time, was kind of cultivating those regions in the vein that they needed for 20 years of our independence. And what we have is the result. All these things that we've had from the end of February, because this is the moment of beginning of Russian invasion here. What we note is that in those regions there were quite good conditions for Russian information intervention or media intervention. They share the same topics, global, regional. They're global for Ukraine, but regional for Russia. No language barrier, and they led to the situation that our media, for a long time, on a large scale, they were printing and regurgitating the information fed to them from the Russian media. And end February, beginning of March, due to several factors, paralysis of state information mechanisms, and our media realized that there is an information vacuum. If something's happening in Crimea, something has to be reported about it, and only Russian media actually feeds some information. And our media just, what they had to do, they became regurgitators for Russian information and amplifiers of that information. And it not only demoralized the Ukrainian population and demoralized our army, especially our Crimean groups, and the international community, since if the Ukrainian media approves and repeats what Russian media is saying, so the international community doesn't have any doubts or second thoughts about the validity of that information. And the situation started to shift only by mid-March. Again, the state structures removed themselves from the task, and only due to not coordinated work of Ukrainian media and social initiatives, these and our group, Information Opposition, was part of that movement, and we started to work at March 2nd. And until now, there's still a question unresolved on blocking the fifth column, so-called, the Russian media that are still very frivolous in our information space. If not in TV anymore, but in print, they have complete freedom of Russian propaganda, to our deep dissatisfaction. And this is the issue, the second. There's no unified information mechanisms in Ukraine that would have been able to really report on actual and immediate events and cover not only Ukrainian but international. And rapid response is where information technology is what we need. The one who first reports and interprets the event, this is the trend or the news former. Others have to either oppose or criticize or admit. And from the start of Russian invasion, this is what we've seen, unfortunately. And the picture only started to change in April somewhere, when there was an order of Mr. Turchinov to create at the staff of ATO the group of informational opposition, and this is when we partly covered the issue of rapid information response. And in June only, we created the press block, what we have here. Although this is only a small part of the problem, right until now, to our dissatisfaction, we still have to resolve the work to the issue of accreditation for the journalists at the ATO zone. And we have experience in this. This is the chief of press center of two brigades who were working in a similar situation in Iraq. There was a region of Vasid, which was controlled by Ukrainian contingent, a small war, partisan, terrorists, and at that conditions the press center was doing work with the international media and accreditation of the Ukrainian media, and besides they printed a paper for Ukrainian contingency. And that experience, due to unknown reasons, we're 5 months into invasion and we still cannot repeat that thing in the ATO. So the question is still hanging in the air. Printing some paper, small paper for the contingent, that's also People's Army, printed by Ministry of Defense, is delivered from time to time. But this is no big problem. Just a truck. There's a printer, 2 computers, and here you got a printing press at your disposal in the field conditions. But due to unknown reasons, there's still no such thing. We don't see it. There's a very dangerous factor. Is that when Ukraine doesn't do the work on accreditation of journalists, and the journalists try to find other ways of finding work in the war zone, and we see nonsensical situations when Western journalists start to get accredited in Russian organizations, LNR or DNR, the so-called republics. But it's absurd how a civilized country can accredit its journalists at the terrorist organization. But they fulfill their first and foremost function, informing the media, informing the public. And if we don't give them the opportunity to cover the events, they find other ways to do it. And you have to clarify that DNR and LNR are not liable for security of the journalists. They never guarantee anything. Another thing about Russian propaganda and its footprint on Crimea and Donbass, so south and east of Ukraine. We see a lot of factors that are they're beneficial to that. It's a very wide range of factors, beginning from the domestic and utility factors to economic state in the region. There are depressive regions, and people start finding explanation to the problems that they have. And when different services give them different versions, and especially Russian versions, it's a seed sown on a very fertile soil. And we still don't see large-scale information projects or awareness-raising projects. We're now working with the secured regions that we freed, but again, very sporadically, chaotically. There's now a newspaper, Unified Ukraine, National Guard with the Ministry of Defense are printing it, but we are sure that these projects should be done in a consolidated manner. There should be a delineation. the newspaper for ATO soldiers, for their problems, for their interests, and there should be a unified project for secure territories. This is the first step that we have to do in as far as information conquest on Donbass or reconquest. So we have to support, we have to feed actual vital information about the utility restoration and so on and so forth. So this has to be a very powerful, I'm not afraid to say, a propaganda work, but based on reality, not on fakery. Okay, it's just cover the secure restoration, peaceful mission in that territories that our National Guard and the Army are carrying over there. So we hope that this is the issue to be resolved now. And if, yeah, people are meeting the soldiers with flowers and bread and salt, yes, but we're happy for those people who are greeting the Liberation Army, but they haven't grown, they haven't cherished much love for Ukraine over these months. They got tired of the warfare. Maybe they are on the side of the Ukrainian warriors now, but they're still not 100% patriotic, let's say. And we need to, you know, win them back to the unified Ukraine from the messages of Russia. And but there's some kind of sobriety going on in Donbass, because we remember the Russia Today covered interview in Slavyansk, and they told us, oh, they are our guys, but you voted for referendum. Yeah, referendum was fake, but we can say that the same people used to vote sincerely for cutting the region away from Ukraine. But now they face the reality of Russian world and Russian politics, and it's sobered them out a little bit. But in other regions, there are still people who are completely they're completely zonked by Russian propaganda. In Kharkiv, in South, in Odessa, Kherson, Nikolaev regions, there are still places there, and we have to be aware of that. An information campaign that should be launched now, they should cover not only them, not only Donbass, but primarily those regions that are still problematic, if we say, in information coverage sense. And the same, they're the same problem as in Donbass, in South and in the East. Now, as for our technical facilities to tackle the information war, in theory, we have things going on. We have in the military and the security services, we have information service, let's say, and the agencies that are now dealing with information, the press service within the Ministry of Defense. It used to be called a department. And they, as a department, had to deal with information coverage and working with local population during the armed conflict. As Yanukovych was president, there were some training, and we thought official adversary would be Romania, because there was supposed to be intrusion into Bukovina. So we developed some solution, coverage, print issues, radio receivers with fixed with fixed band. So it looked very nice on paper, but in fact nobody did know nothing, and it remained on paper. So as a result, we have information. We have anti-terrorist operation now, and everything is under huge pressing from Russian propaganda, and we still lack technical facilities to work to counter it. And here are people from RT concern, and there's the problem on broadcasting by Ukrainian broadcast facilities of Russian TV channels. So in fact, our infrastructure is being used by the enemy. Yeah, there are a lot of nuances here. If we turn them off, those towers, those transceiver towers, then Ukrainian TV channels will be shut off as well. So if there are technical issues, the complex of issues, and there was a suggestion, why don't we stop paying for electricity bills for those transceivers? And there's a counter argument. In Lugansk and Donetsk, utility and energy companies are controlled by the terrorists, and even without even with the money cut off, they won't stop because they have other sources. And you have to realize that these are strategic objects, and an issue of neutralizing them and incapacitating for the use of the enemy, of adversary, this has to be resolved with civil and military specialists, and the lessons will have to be learned, and in the law there will be mechanisms. How does it work so that no one, just one person doesn't take all the responsibility for it? Another factor is that our media space is still not ready to influence territories beyond Ukraine, and Russian propaganda was doing their job quite well due to colossal funds invested into the Western media and TV channels such as Russia Today. So Russia has very powerful means on forming public opinion in the West, in countries like Germany, for instance. With all the active countering, and the truth is on our side, because all we can show is the picture of aggression, but you could see the Europeans had a very hard time realizing that Ukraine is really under aggression from Russia. Only by May they started to realize. But it seems that Europe was not sure about it because Russian propaganda was very strong there. And the breakthrough in the European consciousness we unfortunately saw after the huge tragedy of Malaysian Airlines being taken down by the terrorists. But realistically, they should have realized much earlier, in April, March. Unfortunately, only now we're talking about a broadcasting channel to oppose Russia Today, with Ukraine Today, let's say, which would cover Western territories. But when will it come to fruition? I don't know. Nobody says. Another thing about information and psychological operation, we have an expert who will tell us better about it. What are the methodologies that are being used and can be used? But again, we think that the IPSO, so the whole world, if you're at war, you have an IPSO or something like that in your contingent. In Iraq and Afghanistan, American military demonstrate highest level of these methodologies in the war. So we could dialogue on the level of military and security services. I think the West, Europe, and the USA can share, because we've seen those methods working in Iraq, in the field. We have some people, we had some people there, so, and we could learn a lot. And we have to have such departments, such service and agencies, not only in the special services, but in the military, like part of the staff, which would work in the conflict zone. And we now realize that information doctrine or security doctrine currently is still defunct, but in March it was still legal, and it was approved in 2009, but it didn't work. It never worked. I don't know what small parcel was really implemented. But what we see is the document, the doctrine was just existing on paper. So we have to develop a real document, the new doctrine of information security, not only for declaration, but we have to develop the state programs and within the ministries and agencies, and we have to create everything should be centralized from that. One of the biggest problems, not only about information activity, but the ATO, one of the biggest problem is communication between the military agencies, military forces, and as agencies. We see that modern operations, the hybrid war, so-called, that Putin wages against Ukraine, they require adequate response. And the response is to be maximum consolidated, all efforts of military, the civil society, and in order to consolidate those efforts, we need some centers, some focal points or hubs. And the RNBO, which is Security Bureau, is a prototype of that hub. But they have to have powers not only to coordinate the press services, the departments on the PR departments, but also to be able to coordinate the information structures and psychological warfare, let's say. If we have a unified organ, unified hub, we just hope that this anti-terrorist operation is the first and the last in our history, but still we have to be ready. We have to be prepared like a normal country is prepared. This can be emergency or anything. So we have to learn the terrible lesson that we're learning now. Thank you. I would like to pass the floor to the Yuri Pov, the advisor for the Minister of Defense. He's dealing with the issues of information coordination as part of the Ministry of Defense. Well, I did not think that this discussion would be so open. Then I will just skip a lot of theses that I was going to say. I won't play an advocate of my ministry because we've had a lot of inconsistencies. My question is, what is the problem with the accreditation of journalists in the ATO zone? There is accreditation, there are lists to ATC that are passed to the Press Center of Anti-Terrorist Operation, and if there are some problems or they are detained on the blog post, there are a lot of nuances. Some journalists are not of Ukrainian origin and they are bringing assistance with Russian passports. Not journalists, not operator, not cameraman. So, and there's a problem that leads to a potential problem on the blog post. And our officials have to spend their time. So accreditation and allowance of a journalist to the ATO is possible. It's not too dangerous for themselves, so it's working. As for the issue of informing the local population, you also said some not very 100% precise thing, because right now the Ministry of Defense and our armed forces have worked out complete chain of supply of printed media to the ATO zone. We're now working on creating the newspaper for local population, but I wanted to say that there's a false tendency when all problems in the ATA zone is the burden of military forces. We have big country, we have other agencies, we have other ministries that have to join in with our duty, and this is only the way that because that truck you mentioned is already been installed with equipment and there are going to be people working there, so it's ready to be deployed. As for other issues that you mentioned, I think my presentation is not for a wider audiences, so thank you. Could you the Ministry of Defense is not reliable for external policy. We hear a lot of talks on creating the unified military bloc of the countries who 500 years ago responded to Russia back then. Lithuania, Poland, Ukraine. Now there's a patriotic factor. People are painting picture that why is the ministry silent and why Ukraine within itself You see young men, drunk, going in the street, celebrating, but conscription is for other people. Why are you not and now are you coming here and saying this is not for wider audience? Who is conscripted? Who is not? Well, in this case, yeah, the conscription topic is very sharp now, but the advisor for Ministry of Defense is, we're now talking about the information space. Now, theoretically, we can speak about resolving some information issues that accompany conscription, but I've seen the Ministry of Defense initiate a hotline, but it's not my idea, it's the administration of the President. Of course it has to be done quickly, but I don't think you will, you can hold Yuri liable for this. The hotline is already there, the telephone on the website of Ministry of Defense. There's everything. But they complain that mobilization and conscription is, all the answers are very stereotypical and not very incomplete. But yeah, this has to be discussed in a different format. I'd like to give the floor to Alexander Leonov, Director of Center of Applied Studies, PENTA, about the topic, what should the state mechanism look like to create a state mechanism of information response. Okay, good afternoon. Really, if we're talking about the situation that is now in the state system of security, we remember that over the recent years, we've had all these things sabotaged from the inside. Military forces and partly the security, but the whole system of national security as an institution, as a structure, was sabotaged. And national security was sabotaged as a structure that has to deal with strategic planning, situation analysis, prediction. So over the recent years, we've basically seen all these national institutions liquidated, or, as I said, sabotaged. So it's not surprising that even before the military engagement, as some theoreticians call it, hybrid war, and even the last century, as Eugene Messner called it, Russian rebel war. So it's not so much a war for territory, but it's a war for consciousness of people, for their minds. And it's the old saying that goes, the generals are preparing for the war of the yesterday, and it turned out we're not ready for the war of the today or tomorrow. But again, I stress, this national security as a system was sabotaged and destroyed, because this should have been the structure that would be dealing with the tasks that are at hand. It's good that it's fortunate that as we elected the president and really finally started to form a healthy presidential branch of power, the positive changes started taking place. There's, as Mitro said, there's the Unified Information Center, which feeds valid information every day. We have new structures in place, and basically what we have is already some kind of streamlined processes with the media. There's a unified terminology about the situation in the ATO zone. So we are not only improving our military potential, because hybrid war is waged not only in the military field. As we said, it's a war for the minds of people. So this is a diplomatic war, or no, not war, but diplomatic clash or game, and it's a psychological war, and we can see that Ukraine has managed closely to starting tip the scales. But yeah, there are still issues, but they are being resolved on a daily basis, step by small step. As far as I know, there's already the first edition of the newspaper basically printed for, which is intended for the population of the liberated regions. And another thing, I would like to mention that psychological war. Informational war operates information. Psychological warfare operates emotions. And this is where we can often voluntarily or involuntarily play in favor of our adversary. Just a week ago, there was a split of the coalition in the parliament, and the ministers started saying apocalyptic things about the future, and people's deputies started broadcasting emotional messages, rumors, and they impacted negatively on the situation. And today we should say that politicians have to bear responsibility for what they're saying. They have to really, keep their words where their money is. And as the American classics used to say about information war, bad news only keep for a day on the top, but lies is remembered for a long time. And we have to remember that everything we said can be used against us. This is the nature of psychological warfare. And this is why today, obviously, we have to not only speak about the streamlining, cohesion between the state agencies and structures, but we have to speak about the responsibility of all the politicians, of all political parties that are active in Ukraine. As for the issue, what has to be done? Obviously, basically all the steps that the state takes, they are taken in order to correct the situation, to cure and restore all the vital systems that were, as I said, sabotaged before, to recreate some of the basic tools that the state has at its disposal. And among the most important and pertinent problems is that most of the legal tool set is reflexive, is reactive. We are reacting on what adversary does. But our legal space does not allow us to be really proactive. For instance, what I mean, we have such a tool as emergency status or military status in the country. There are a lot of arguments around it, but obviously introducing the emergency state, it can really hinder the situation rather than improve it, because it would bear a lot of problems, including problems for anti-terrorist operation. We have to, instead, let's say, learn from the US experience, where there's a color scale of threats. There's a code yellow, code red, and in correspondence to the threats that the country faces, there are instructions, there are workflows for all the state agencies. They have precise workflow what to do. And this approach allows to act proactively. And we have a task on hand to create a new analytical center. It's not just an agency. It has to deal with strategic planning. It has to lead the reform of military forces and system of national security. Obviously, we're talking about restoration of vital interconnection and cooperation with volunteers, with activists, create the networks, because the networks, the modern networks, really allow to quickly respond on the things that inertia of the state does not allow to respond to. Cyber threats as well, because we remember cyber attacks on voting systems, we remember attacks on the governmental websites, but Ukraine, it's going to be tough for Ukraine to tackle this problem on its own, because I remember in Estonia, where the whole hell broke loose in cyberspace, and NATO has to adopt changes in the concept of tackling cyber threats. And as for the concept, Ukraine has to thoroughly analyze not only the way anti-terrorist operation is ongoing, but to analyze the hybrid warfare that Russia is waging, and along with this system analysis, to introduce new changes, to adopt the new military doctrine of information security, and they have to be based on new knowledge, new tool sets, capitalizing on positive experience. And as Mitro said, there's a very pertinent issue of training our specialists. Because learning from experience, as we say, experience of the US, is very important. Because as I said, during the war in Iraq, there was the whole division responsible for information and psychological warfare. It was called Force 21, and we could basically see firsthand how it worked. And the recent changes in the status of the country, as Ukraine was granted the status of ally beyond NATO, and it allows to participate in the trainings, it allows to acquire training, knowledge for our experts, and acquire new tool set to effectively tackle the hybrid war. Well, this is a topic for lengthy conversations. We need parallel processes, because we need unified structures. Because there's a so-called anti-defamation, where we have to deal with untruthful information which is thrown against Ukraine. We have to be responsible for our information policy, and there's often the dissonance between what different people are saying. So obviously, if I would conclude, we have to rebuild and recreate the tools and the agencies that would not only fight off the existing threats, but be proactive and prevent the potential or future threats. So thank you. Yulia Laputina, Deputy Head of Department of State Security Service. Dear friends, thank you for this invitation. But I would like to note also that we were preparing for a different kind of conversation among strictly professional representatives, not the wider media. So maybe we still have professional discussion to discuss the things that not always have to be discussed with wider audiences. But State Security Service, and I will agree with Mitro, in 2008 and maybe earlier, we saw Russian special services getting more and more active. and they were actively stepping on our information space. And you know what the situation was just before the Maidan. Who would have listened to us? There are many officers, really professional, really patriotic. They are the majority, but the machine was cast iron, and it was dead set on its target. And this is what we have now is the result of that work. Because civil society was more ready to respond to the threats, and even thanks to that, thanks to the citizens, we are now seeing through those adverse plans. Because Russia was acting on old scenarios and developed by Stalin and Goebbels. And it turns out our people are far advanced. It's not a declaration, it's a sincere analysis for understanding what's happening. We see civil society more and more active. People really realize that state security is not to be relieved 100% to the government. It's their own. If they don't take it into their hands, nobody will. And as for the security issues and ATO, I would like to say that when at the start of the operation, which officially started on April 14th, I think it was first week of the anti-terrorist operation, and we really went out on a limb for the Kramatorsk. They created small leaflets about the so-called republics. So this is a criminal gang announcing some kind of republic. Do you want to live in a criminal republic? And we have arranged to spread these leaflets over Slavyansk, because they said, we have friends there, we have relatives there, do something, help us distribute those leaflets. And you know what happened? This helicopter was being shot at, and with its gas tank shot through, it returned to Kramatorsk. So the Russian propaganda wanted to cut all the, to close all the smallest holes through which the light of truth could shine. What's happening now in the ATO zone and what was happening in the first days? In reality, it's my grounded opinion. A lot of people are disoriented. A lot of people are zombified by Russia 24 and Russia Today and so on. But there are a lot of people who are critical thinking, small and medium businesses, not who simply learned to want to be working on their land and, you know, leading a normal life. They don't want to live in Russia. They want to live in Ukraine. They want to grow their families, do their business. And there were a lot of civil initiatives. From the very first days of ATO, I know what I'm saying. They were offering support and help for the army, anything they could afford, starting from the food to chevrons and lapels that they crafted themselves for our law enforcers and the military. So we have a huge potential of healthy, normal people who are ready to help us. What happened after the number of cities were liberated or secured? Well, you cannot really level them. They are different because there are towns who were liberated first. There are towns which are liberated now. It's a different situation. because the towns and cities which were liberated months ago, the life is starting to get the normal. But there are cities that have just been liberated, and the people are still very shocked. They don't understand who was shelling them. So this is what we have to do, because for them, the fact that Ukrainian army is the liberator is still not clear. And we have a video that we shot there. The woman who's saying, you know, they wanted to shell the school, because they were shelling from one place and then they moved to another place and shell from that another place, just to stage as if it was done by the Ukrainian army, so that and you have to break through this thick layer of lies, untruth, and misinformation and sabotage. So it's a real challenge to work with people, with the population in that ATO zone, because a lot of people just want peace. But the challenge for the liberation mission is a risk of returning of those people who were actively supporting the terrorists, who were actively collaborating with them, and they are attempting again to return to those cities. And this is the problem for law enforcement: infiltration measures, prevention measures that would counter this threat. But in informational sphere, it means that now on the liberated territories, with support of active population, we have to restore these normal pro-Ukrainian media, and we have to restore the volunteers work already. There have to be several initiatives. I would suggest, for instance, by the Independence Day, we could think of some awareness-raising events or initiatives that would just be good. What I think is very important as far as the organization of the cooperation between the law enforcement and the military, we can say that there's distribution of labor between the agencies, but there is one threat that we are all facing, both society and the army and the law enforcers. What is now being created as RNBO and where we're now, Ukrinform, and the events that have to integrate somehow the information spheres. This is brilliant, but although it's a little too late, I have to admit, but still there, it's there. Because nobody was prepared, as we've said. But I think, again, that important thing is to organize in the ATO zone the ways to get fresh, valid, non-distorted information. Because the media, the military and the security forces, they know that all the peacekeeping operations had information psychological services and agencies. There's a combat camera team that go into the field and they film the actual military operation. But it's not one team. It's a team. There are several teams, and they are manned with professional military who are capable of defending themselves, not just running around with camera. Besides, the combat camera team have to have a clear task to cover those events that are important now for coverage, for the operation, for the state, for the country. Besides, since there are various agencies active in the ATO zone. One of the suggestions is to create, let's say, police teams, or okay, we would call it as a team for coverage of law enforcers activities that would uncover terrorist bases, find stashes of their weapons, and they would cover those events that would expose the terrorists and foreign presence. So this was a kind of a suggestion. Would have been very important to have a very vast network of agents who would submit such information. And you know how important it is to create a video from the actual site of events. And volunteers is not to have volunteers is not enough. You have to have professional military to support that, to coordinate what should be covered, what should not be covered. Because, for instance, our bitter experience of our Russian adversaries is that when they post in their social accounts the actual info that they are fighting against Ukraine, we have to learn from their mistakes. Another challenge is that the information war, and we have to switch from reactive policy when Russia says something and we respond. We have to develop step by step our own policy. The policy of the country that defends the truth and its freedom and territorial integrity. We don't have to spend all our energy on just responding to that endless wall of lies and shameless disinformation. So a very important element of informational security is to create a working network of broadcasting channels that would cover abroad, because we can say that we know the truth, but look at the Russia, how much money they spend on media coverage abroad, and they cover among the diaspora, among the various communities, and we have to present the truth. Who's going to do it? Is that going to be one channel or several media channels? This is a job for journalists, and I think it's a task of utmost importance. Well, I wasn't preparing to have some presentation, but I have a couple of surprises. Look at we're looking for proof of Russian presence. This is there's food for soldiers. There's rations, daily rations for Russian troops. You can find it on the terrorist base. And this is help from, the Russian political party. This is coffee, Russian coffee. We found it on the terrorist base again. This is beef, canned beef with Russian origin, and this is a very interesting find. Russian motorbikes. It's a motorbike club emblem. So all these things were found on the terrorist base. This is a biker club banner, and who supports them. What other proof? We're finding tons of proof of those artillery machines that our planes are being shot down by Russian armament, and I think international community is still kind of dormant. They're looking at all this proof and still trying to wake up from sleep or something. So we would like journalists to really help us bring the truth out, to wake up the international community that the Russian aggression is not a figment of imagination. It's brutal reality. I have a small remark. As for combat camera team, in Ukrainian reality it's called camera team for the Ministry of Defense, and they are working from the very start of the ATO. And all the videos of the first military clashes, those videos were shot by our camera teams. Currently, fortunately, we don't have any losses. We have one wounded, several concussed, and several rigs were damaged by artillery shells. So we have 11 teams, camera teams, working in the field, and we have faced the challenge that it's one thing to shoot a video, but to transmit it, to broadcast it, it's another thing. So we will buy the equipment with the help of our sponsors and volunteers to help quickly stream this information, because military journalists do not cover for themselves, they cover for the country. So we bought these combat cameras. Together with your agency, we're going to make that organize the flow of information, but we promise in the nearest future a much better quality of our materials. Question? You mentioned that you shot some videos of the first flashes. Where do you post it? On the internet? It's important to post it on YouTube or something. Is it classified? Yeah, we post it on YouTube and we spread it through the file exchange with central broadcast channels. It's a very wide distribution. There is a central information archive of Ukraine, a TV archive, and there's a law of Ukraine that regulates, and it says that all the video materials with Ukrainian GOST or standard standing should be passed to archive. Are those materials you mentioned are in the archives, or again by the end of the year we will see 0 stored in the archive? Of course all materials will be archived, but considering that we have to give the picture as fast as possible, we have opted for the way that I mentioned, distribution. Due to the fact that we know what we know about the military journalists, all these archives are stored in the central studio of Ministry of Defense. They are not disappearing anywhere. That's a fact. I think we have a situation where the state of Ukraine is losing another information war, internal. Earlier, it was good for some people to have a closed system. Now we have different things. We have a lot of speakers, a lot of civil initiatives, territorial info streams, all the various information that comes from them becomes a weaker link that can be manipulated in various conditions and various vectors. And I would like to know, how well do you understand and this problem? Are you going to do something about it? And if, because one thing to coordinate between the agencies, and another thing to coordinate between the civil activists, which are not exactly 100% manageable. I am one of them, and I understand how it works. Allow me to respond. Yeah, indeed. we are living in a very complicated time. And it's not a function of Ministry of Defense or Ministry of or Security Service to put a sock in everybody's mouth. We are living in a democracy. When we tried to write elementary rules of journalism in the ATO, in the military zone, we've heard a lot of criticisms in our address. And we decided to not tackle this for now, because but it's surprising. The journalists from international agencies who are coming to Israel, Iraq, Afghanistan, they strictly stick to the field rules. The commander has a rule to order not to film. He can take the journalist or not if the physical condition doesn't allow for the unit to operate, and so on and so forth. So these, I think we will return to these issues 5 minutes after the end of the war. But we have to account for that. We have no regulation for working with documents for journalists. We understand how the information space have to work in the military situation, but it's a political thing. It requires a military status, or and this should put a lid on all Ukrainian media, and that's a problem. It should not be postponed for 5 minutes after the war. They're tactical issues. What I meant securing democratic press, and properly organizing it is the 5 minutes after war. But the strategy, a lot of people in the media have not served in the army, but they proclaim really serious things when they talk to us, and we see a direct ties of those declarations with those hysterics, bouts of hysterics. The moment army goes forward, this is where they start psychological operation by foreign special services. Unfortunately, a lot of civil society starts screaming and bouts of hysterics. Everything is lost. We have been betrayed. We see this threat. We try to work with more conscious part of the people who are involved in this, and we hope that this will have a better result. What I wanted to add is that possibly, you can see it's all happening in the days of war. Not the Ministry of Defense or Security Service can do that on its own accord. But if the civil society sees the problem, why don't you start a civil initiative to tackle this? Because Security Service and Ministry of Defense, they are state agencies, but if you see a clear problem, that people are passing the information to each other, where they're standing, and who's moving where, it creates a little bit of chaos. But you have to, you can use civil initiatives. Okay, we have very tight schedule. So just one more presentation, and the remaining time we spend on questions and answers. Sergei Tolstov, Director of the Institute of Political Studies, International Political Studies. He will talk about potential of Ukraine to form public opinion beyond its borders. Thank you. well, I will try not to turn into a lecture, not to turn my presentation into a lecture. Let me just cover the most important things. And any question is like talking to a doctor. Doctor, what is going to be with me? It depends, says doctor, whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. Ukraine has its, let's say, credit story. It has some tradition of so Ukraine has two faces now. As a country who fights in Donbass, a country that suffered a lot of image losses in the course of annexation of Crimea, and a country which had a criminal for a president for a long time. And the number of presidents who had strange background and behavior. So this is the history, and it's not going to change overnight. And then this is why there are weird traditions still retained in working with journalists. And this is why we see a lot of situations where Western journalists cover the same situation saying different things. And this is where this is why I said this funny story with a doctor. It depends on whether you're a pessimist or an optimist. The country has a lot of problems and issues, very pertinent, and the perception of Ukraine is depends largely on the situation, and is comprised of 5 or 6 blocks. Top news, as most agencies say, declaration of politicians, the national politicians in their countries. If Angela Merkel says one thing about today as an optimist, and the German population understands it one way, but next day if Angela Merkel says that it's not our business anymore, then again it sends a strong message to the public and creates a public opinion. If we talk about the US, where the cold civil war is still ongoing, we can say, since the clash of South and North, where sometimes clashes between Republicans and Democrats sometimes remind us of Ukrainian politics. But again, a lot of things depend on what and who says to the American public. And the third aspect is the main information stream of the news pertaining to Ukraine, and of course followed by Ukrainian diplomacy and their information coverage, information resources of Ukraine, radio, information agencies, English-speaking agencies and editions and so on. And the most important thing for us, but more fragmentary for the West, is competence and adequacy of Ukrainian power office. And the last aspect that has to be taken into account is the efficiency of Ukrainian counter-propaganda and efficiency of analysis of those information bits and pieces that form public opinion for Ukraine. Each of these aspects that I mentioned can in turn be measured on a scale of 5 or 10, and this dynamic picture is going to be very uneven if we do that. For instance, the behavior of Ukrainian power as regards to the tragedy of Malaysian Boeing was unique. Administration of the current president has not made any mistake this time, has not lingered and responded to everything very sharp. And that is explained by the simple fact that Ukrainian power office couldn't do anything to really, but to make the picture for the West proper, they did everything like the clockwork. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs decision, an order passed by the parliament, and contact groups, the trilateral groups, everything was done seamlessly, like never before, because never before we've seen such cohesion and such speed from the actions of Ukrainian power office. But on the other hand, there are a lot of different information bits with which the Ukrainian agencies, be it information agencies or security agencies, never respond or fail to respond. There were some expectations that Madame Sumar, who is Deputy Chief of Secretary of State Security, we thought she would do something about it, but she never did anything but work with information. But experience doesn't work. No results was seen from her. After that, situation changed and she resigned. There were some efforts to create departments at government, as a governmental departments. One was supposed to be called Ukrainian coverage or Ukrainian awareness. The projects are stalled, whereas the private projects, such as Global Ukraine by Arseniy Yatsenyuk, they mostly deal with information regarding certain leaders, political leaders. So who is dealing with counter-propaganda? Who is responding to those information attacks about Ukraine and on Ukraine? Who is battling the war that Russia still successfully wages in the foreign information space? It's still unclear. The Council of State Security does not give any answers. Information agencies, they don't resolve this on their own. And in the situation of war propaganda, it's very often the case that the viewer or the listener finds it very hard to understand what's really happening in the situation. Well, of course, it's very difficult to find pure information. For instance, there was some reports of a Spanish dispatcher or aircraft dispatcher in Borispil airport. That was weird because dispatchers, they are strictly controlled on a national level, and security system will approve what I say. This is a military structure. There's no way a Spanish dispatcher suddenly wound up in the tower. Another allegation that we heard is that Malaysian Boeing suddenly veered off its course, or when the corridor was closed or not closed. So whether the Ukraine closed airspace for Donbass 2 weeks prior to that, or it was not the case. So all these rumors or issues or information bits circulating around, and each of them or any of them can put doubts on any good thing that's happening. You don't have to act like Russia Today or Russia 24, of course, because This is, they are working to make their already paranoid society even more paranoid. Because I cannot even imagine how intellectually strong country can be brought to a miserable, paranoid state of a global mind that we are seeing them now. Because I am very concerned for the mental state of our neighbor. But the information streams that are working to form the Western mindset, they are not as primitive, but still they stress simple, clear, emotional messages that create sympathy or antipathy or distrust of the public to certain things. If we talk about political class, here, of course, the level of cynicism, distrust, secondary and primary analytics is much bigger, but political class in both Ukraine and the West seldom reacts to some situation adequately, because the political class plays a political game according to clear and understandable political rules. So a conclusion we can draw from that is that Ukraine requires a center of analysis of politically important information. We have to think about the content and the scope of information security, because in many cases the decisions of RNBO that were taken in the 90s to push the Russian language completely away from the information space, they were destructive, because this basically led to detonation of territorial integrity this year. It was all about the language issue. Plus a lot of internal aspects after this crisis will have to be reviewed, because nobody's asking, neither the conscripted or volunteers, which language they speak. Nobody's asking them. After you're wounded, you speak the language you grew up with. And there will be no reason to return to the language issue after the war, because obviously Ukrainian propaganda and organizing of information streams must be much more responsible and much smarter than what our adversary is doing. And this is why we have to close a number of topics that we have to cover some ground in terms of information security, because in the US, let's say, the assassination of JFK was the fact that showed the US citizens that you can everything is possible in America. But if JFK assassination is let's say one main criteria that allows to say that American democracy is imperfect, we have a lot of such dents in our democracy. The assassination of Gangadze, assassination of many journalists, and the last brick in the wall is the shooting on Maidan, which I doubt will be investigated properly ever. And when the crisis in Donbass will end sooner or later, although I think it will not end because of Putin will run out of tanks. He has a lot of tanks, more than 10,000. And he has to do something with them. They are getting rusty. And I think after the crisis is over, hopefully, we'll have to look in the mirror and resolve those issues cover those holes that make our country weaker and vulnerable. Thank you. Okay, there were a lot of questions about Russian TV still broadcasting on TV. RRT concern, Pavel Blaženko will comment on that. Oh, Bilanoshko, I'm sorry. Esteemed members of the media, I would like to tell you about the technical or organization technical aspects of information security with which the concern RRT has faced from the very start of the clash between from the very start of Russian aggression from Crimea. The green Russian military, what they started to capture, TV centers and broadcast centers, and then administrative buildings. Our organization responded to these challenges rapidly, and we issued all the necessary orders that regulated the activity of managing teams of TV broadcast centers in all over Ukraine, including the east. And when Kramatorsk was captured, all these orders were enforced, and we prevented the seizure of our teleradio broadcast center. What was the nature of those orders? We cut the electricity off that facility, and all the employees are evacuated. This this makes the equipment safer, because when you do certain things to the equipment, it's inoperable. You cannot broadcast anything, and there's no threat to the lives of people. So the order was to cut the power from the equipment and lead the employees away. But in the process of unfolding of a military campaign by Russia against Ukraine, or the new type of warfare, undeclared hybrid warfare, somehow the management was changed in the sphere of information security of our country, and those orders were cancelled, which led to the situation when the TV broadcast centers were captured. There are about 6 of them captured in Lugansk and Donetsk, but they are being secured back by Ukrainian army. The people started continued to go to work under the barrel of a gun. They were threatened to retune the transceivers. We, as a team of concern RRT, we sent a lot of letters, addresses, that still we need to get back to those possibilities that allow us to stop broadcasting of Russian propaganda on that territory. Yes, we need to cut off the electricity temporarily, but we don't ask for additional finances. And second thing, lead away, evacuate the people who work there, because people as refugees, they came back to us. They asked to provide some living facilities and a dormitory, and with the help of trade unions, because prior to that the management did not notice those people, the trade unions pushed them, and finally it worked. So the Ministry of Defense, why I'm saying this, we need that Security Service and Ministry of Defense have to strengthen this thing somehow, because we think what we see with our own eyes. The work of counterintelligence, the intelligence that has to expose spies, sabotage, and so on, they don't work. So the work of your services, or the services of communication, so what some people in your agencies are doing are deemable as state treason, and still nothing happens. They continue to pay for electricity, people continue to go to work there, and today they took hostage the director of Lugansk TV radio broadcast center. So we're talking that today, now, some things can be changed. Not 5 minutes after war, now and today, some things have to be taken to help those soldiers and the army who is fighting there on in the zone, and create all the necessary conditions to at least stop the propaganda and save the lives of our specialists who work there on those TV broadcast centers. Please listen to our plea, and as you said, that civil society should be involved. Yeah, we are ready to help. Me, besides, I'm not only working in the RRT concern. I'm a deputy head of community council of. We have a lot of youth organizations. They have their website. They have their own media channels. They have, well, everything at their disposal can be used. Please tell us how to help you, how to cooperate with you. We can do many things, but there are a lot of questions to you in this regard. Second thing I would like to mention is what the military are saying that are fighting there. Not only our TV broadcast towers broadcast Russian channels, satellites as well. The satellites are owned by Israel and European countries, not so much the US. I'm surprised. Why don't you work with those countries regarding the broadcast of Russian channels, Russia 24, which is broadcast all over the world, to stop working with them? Because this is propaganda. They do it in Russia and in Europe. European countries are saying that they are imposing some 25th wave of sanctions, but the satellites are still gushing the propaganda over, so you can just put a dish on the roof and see Russian channels, and we cannot do anything about it because this is international level. So that is the point that I wanted to deliver. This issue can and should and must be tackled now, today, securing our TV broadcast centers and further on. So I understand that resolving this issue on the level of RRT to stop broadcasting TV channels, Russian TV channels on Donbass, it's impossible. It is possible. What is needed? The decision can be done by the director. First, stop feeding the electricity. If not the money, then the document to cut off the electricity. They can provide the information where they take the electricity from. So cutting off the electricity, and second, take the people away from the work. Send them to a vacation or send them on a business trip. Of course, not throw them away. Support them. We have enough buildings or facilities in our concern that can be adopted as dormitories or temporary residence, and temporarily engage them in something else. So it is possible, and it was done first, but then it was turned over. Let's just restore those orders that were issued before the start of the anti-terrorist organization operation. Who canceled them. Director General Pivnuk, who was appointed the director after the capture of Kramatorsk by terrorists. My position is PR manager. Alexander Pivnuk was the name of that official. So RRT was not part of our schedule, but he asked for the word. Let me just add something. It's not acceptable that such capacities, such technical capacities, work for adversary. And it's just there is a fight for the portfolio. There's a power clash. Any type of such discussion is immediately perceived as, oh, this is a power clash. No, what we've understood from that, a number of specialists told us, electrical facility, RRT is a concern. Yes, the electricity was paid by someone. If even what the specialists tell us, who are not engaged in a power confrontation, if we stop paying for electricity, Lugansk Energo is controlled by the terrorists. They will feed electricity anyway. Secondly, if we remove our specialists from this facility, and there were cases where people were really threatened under the barrel of the gun, because there was an attempt to cut off the Russian TV, and the person was beaten brutally. And LNR started bringing in Russian specialists from Russia. The TV will continue to work. Technically, well, the only thing we can do is put a sniper and who will try to shoot the wires or something. This is why I raised this question in my presentation. This issue should be resolved in peaceful time, at least on the borderline territory. And there should be an algorithm when the concerned management should be able to make this decision. If it's a hidden aggression, there's an algorithm. The tower doesn't work. But in the war zone, military TV crews, that's the only solution that I see. What about cable TV? Well, yes, indeed, it's possible, but that will be like a military activity against Russia directly. It's a weapon that is going to be attacking Russian armament, and the specialists will tell you that. In our concern, there are such capacities. They are not engaged because of this reason, because this will provoke direct warfare with Russian Federation. But we're not shooting Russian tanks that are in Russia. And our artillery is not shooting there. The war is here, and it's not called war, it's called anti-terrorist operation. If we attack directly the Russian troops who are, or Russian technical facilities who are giving or feeding the signal to our transceivers, this will be direct damage to Russian special facilities. And that's why Russia will be in position to start direct warfare against Ukraine. Well, they installed some very weak transceivers. Okay, you need to at least do something about it. Well, we can come up with a lot of things, and our team realized that, at least majority of us who are patriots of Ukraine. And I think that it is very bad to leave it as that and just throw out our people who are like refugees now and tell them, guys, if you're afraid to be under the gunfire, please come to us. We will accept you there and accommodate you there. And people are afraid. They don't know where to go and whether somebody will really accommodate them. So we could have saved our people, our specialists, because we don't know when the warfare will resume. Will they shell these TV centers with artillery? Okay, question to Madam Yulia. Could you tell us, from August 1st, Russia said they would be using the data from social networks. What is this mechanism? Who is collecting this data? How and what kind of information they will be using against people? Yeah, the detailed information is available on our website, and the head of security service has made a statement in this regard, and you probably know. I'll just say that indeed there is a threat of using personal data of persons registered in social networks listed in our website. It's Russian resources, Vkontakte, Odnoklassniki. Therefore, Security Service of Ukraine has already made a statement and warned people against so that your data, your personal data, can be used if you're registered in those networks. So an adverse party can use that data. It's just a warning. Technical means, I don't think I need to say something about it. You probably know it. But if it's your personal decision whether to use those networks or not, it's just we warn you that your personal data, if you're registered in Russian social networks, those data can be used by special services. The last presentation, Center of Military Political Studies, Vyacheslav Gusarov, on the prospects of creating the information security system in Ukraine. Okay, I would like to follow up the previous speaker who said about the means of radio electronic suppression of broadcasting facilities. Let me just clarify technically. There's no crime, there will be no crime if our radio suppressors or signal suppressors will suppress those stations, those transceivers, or that radio electronic information that is radiated from wherever, which simply shouldn't be perceived by our receivers. So I would like to say that we have in the Ministry of Defense such means, such technical means, from 30 megahertz to 400 megahertz is the bandwidth, but that's a technical issue. What I would like to mention is the measures of information security in the ATO zone, which is a very delicate question. We are analyzing this for a long time now, since the very start of the ATO. Who has the information owns the world, which is Mr. Rothschild once said. And those who manage information, they manage the situation. In our case, managing information is managing the ATO. We can see that Russian propaganda machine is dominating the information situation that is now, not only in ATO, but in Ukraine in general. And countering the Ukrainian media attempts at counter propaganda are still very weak. Volunteer organizations are pretty active in this regard, and the media of both state or non-state format, but that doesn't mean that there is some kind of hub or management center of counter-propaganda. There still is no such hub. We're still going to make one. We have analyzed the ways how we can form that center, and we arrived at the conclusion that the algorithm can be pretty simple. First, we need to create an information, a legal framework for that. A legal framework is a topic for a separate discussion. So first, legal framework. Second, management centers and those structures who will directly fulfill certain tasks on counter-propaganda and information security. Third, to create information analytical agencies and structures who will determine the threat, the level of informational threat, and who will predict and calculate the consequences, potential consequences, and the consequences of all the information threats that we have already seen from the Russia. Nobody's calculating them. And that's why we're having now serious damage in this regard. Plus, acquisition of, well, coming up with certain tasks, specific tasks, and fulfilling those tasks. Of course, if we say all this scope of problems to the decision makers, they will immediately respond, oh, we don't have much money for that. It's not for now. Let's postpone it. So what we have to strive for is to create some kind of mirror system, like system of information security. To create a system of information security as minimized version with one goal in mind: to secure certain tasks for the anti-terrorist operation, and then with time to improve it and increase it. Now the following, some technical aspects of the counter-propaganda in the ATO zone. First, we've already mentioned that there are traditional means of counter-propaganda: printed media, TV and radio, word of mouth as well. But we keep forgetting about such interesting things as mobile communication. Mobile telephone, everybody have it. Or pads, gadgets, we all have them. So everything using internet, everything allowing you to send voice messages, well, the list is long, but owners of such mobile devices will always be able to receive information from information sources. Everything: picture, sound, video. I would like to voice my support to those who are those NGOs and civil society who are attempting and successfully waging the information war, counter-propaganda. I think they should be an integral part of the system of internet information security for the country. If we take foreign analogies, they are quite successful in delivering negative messages. from hiring the army of trolls to sit in the internet and post offensive things. One short thesis is that if you want to win the information war, your information has to stick, and the information of the system of information security in Ukraine has to work in favor of the politics of the state. Do you have an understanding that in Donetsk and Lugansk there are two information streams, pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian? Do you understand that the biggest, widest mass of Ukraine doesn't believe either of them, and that the validity and value of this information is close to zero? There were cases when they published information about bomb shelters, and it's valuable information, but people didn't trust, wasn't trusted. The people do not distinguish between who's the enemy. We see the First Federal Channel, we understand that this is lies. It's a stereotype right now. And just in this way, there are people who live in Donbass, they act the same way. They take the information from Ukrainian media, but they don't believe it. And those who believed it, they left. So what do you plan to do to break through this barrier? And secondly, you mentioned mobile devices. What will you do if Lugansk doesn't have neither electricity nor mobile communication, and of course no internet? Can you imagine a city with 1 million population where there's no electricity, no internet? What kind of communication with population would you have? Okay, answering your first question, it's hard to imagine the situation when there's where there's so black and where distinguishing the information goes through such a black and white filter. If a person doesn't accept any of these streams, it means that he or she doesn't listen at all. Because if you hear two opposing blocks of information, you make a choice. It's hard for me to imagine a person who would see several TV shows and not remember anything. Well, anyway, something is something you remember. Some information sticks anyway. Your second question. Mobile communication and electricity. Yeah, of course that will constitute a problem, but let's not forget that moral support, not only the population requires moral support, we have to keep the morale of our troops. In our units where we work, they have something like mobile generators. They charge their telephones in the morning. Yeah. We charge our telephones, they write me, and we go to work. In the zone occupied by terrorists, the electricity can be absent. Yes, this is a challenge, but we have to find other means of communication. Okay, what has to be done to force the state to really respond rapidly, to create a ministry or a committee of propaganda, if you want, or information security? What do we have to do to make the country, to make the government work towards that? Okay, it's simple. We have to make the people, the decision makers, really understand how important it is. Will you do that? Okay, I was as a journalist on a meeting of young entrepreneurs from Lugansk region. among them there were a couple of Muscovites, and they were blaming the situation. They were telling us that they were laying the blame on Ukrainian side for demolishing or dismantling the 4G communication. So their point is that we're so obsolete in technological sense. Okay, we've heard about 11 combat crews. And we've heard an example of Force 21 by American Army. When finally we have our Ukrainian information troops like that? So where we are now? Yeah, I am where you are, the same island. Listen to me. The telephone that I have or the telephone that you have can accept video messages, text messages, pictures, and so on. So this was what we have. 4G and 3G and other G is just a better version of what we already have. We won't argue over that right now. Maybe you have better technical facilities, so that means you have already answered your question. Well, technical criticism. The legal framework in Ukraine, if we start right now to create a state legal framework, we will be able to counter Russian propaganda minimal after a year, maybe longer. It has to be done through civil institutions who are who work much more rapidly. And second thing, you said we have to start with the anti-terrorist operation zone and then expand. No, what's happening in the ATO zone is not the main impact zone of propaganda. The main propaganda is Volyn region, where they raise soldiers' mothers to block the roads. And we have a very tight limit. Okay, what was the first question? Okay, legal framework. Legal framework. Imagine a situation like Information Psychological Warfare Department, appointed by the Ministry of Defense, goes to the war zone and starts working there. Somebody's died, unfortunately, or wounded. And then we open the whole body of information and laws, and the specific authority starts asking questions. I was managing psychological information operations in the war, and I know what it is. Currently, of course, without support, volunteers can work without a legal framework, but in order to manage them, you have to establish some sort of center. You cannot just voluntarily do whatever you want. Your second question. Streamlining all our efforts for information and psychological warfare. Yeah, you have a point there, valid point. I did not mean that ATO zone should be limited. ATO zone has certain priorities because, of course, the biggest attention is now paid to that particular zone. But Ukraine cannot exist without information psychological countermeasures. And there you also have a valid point. Okay, I'm very thankful, but just one question and that's all. It's just that we raised a very comprehensive, very big topic, and you have to look at the legal framework, the existing legal framework that allows us to build, to capitalize on and build a new system of information security. I think next meeting will be narrowed down a little bit with more specialists, but we will report later. These are very valid points. Even if in 2009, the year we adopted the previous doctrine, it was mostly a figment of imagination. It was done only for paper. Right now, we have a real threat. We have a real adversary, even potential. Yeah, right now it's Russia. It's a direct aggressor. But we've seen Romania, Hungary, there are some political forces that had been becoming active. And there's a military doctrine and there's information security doctrine. Right now, we're testing. Unfortunately, it's paid by blood of our heroes, but we have to learn our lessons. So I'm thankful for everyone. On the website, you can find an email if you have any pertinent questions that you would like to file us.